I'll take it live here. Hi, everyone. I am Bob Tremblay. This is the Warren Astronomical Society meeting at Cranbrook. I am not at Cranbrook because I have COVID and you don't want me there. So, and I've been having bouts of not feeling good, so I don't want to be on the road when that happens. But anyway, so some news. We have a message board that has been installed on the side of Stargate Observatory, so we can put a calendar up in it and information on upcoming events and that kind of thing, and that is really cool. It's rather large and rather deep. Uh, Jeff McLeod seems to think that they'll be able to fit an Apollo, a Lego Apollo in there, which would be really cool. Okay, so we have a
fitting a Saturn rocket.
Yeah, Saturn V. So there is a Perseus event, both at Stargate Observatory, and there's a large event at Stony Creek on the 12th. I've gotten several volunteers for the Stony Creek event. Thank you. We've got another event out at Kensington Metro Park at the old site of astronomy at the beach. They're just looking for 1 or 2 telescopes, and I think I may have already gotten a volunteer for that. Our awards banquet is being held on Monday, December 11th from 6 to 11 p.m. Thanks to Mark Kedzier for all his efforts in researching the venue and getting it booked for us. Herculean effort is the word that comes to mind. Thank you again, Mark. If you have a suggestions for a keynote speaker for our banquet, contact us because we would like to know about that. So Adrian, are there any first timers there? Any first timers?
Before we ask for the first timers, there was a question about where the banquet is being held.
It is being held at the the Ukrainian Cultural Center.
Yep, and it will be a cash bar for those like myself who are interested in that sort of thing. If so, Ken, I'll put you in between them two. We're going to put Ken Burton in. We'll have you negotiate the peace truce between those two. But you know, if it's for science, I think they'll drop the guns and the AKs to talk science. Science is one of those things that bridges communities together, and despite all of this, there's still Russian involvement in things going on in space. So there's something to be said about our chosen hobby. Are there any new members here? If so,
first timers.
New first timers. Either raise your hand, stand up. We've got 2.
We do, really. How'd you hear about us?
I'll translate.
We're just here for summer in Michigan. We live in Florida, and we got some binoculars, and we're thinking about getting into astronomy. We called. I was googling something, and I called Bob Herzog. Asked if he invited us, so we're just here to enjoy ourselves and get some information. We want to buy some new equipment, but I don't know if I want to buy binoculars or a telescope. I think.
Yeah, there's plenty. You've got plenty of folks in here that can narrow down your choice, because it really depends on what you've already seen and what you would like to see. Michigan is a place, unlike Florida, there are some spots in Florida that get Bortle 3, Bortle 2 dark. Michigan gets Bortle 4, Bortle 3 dark. So that limits some of what you can see and how your aperture goes. But still, there are a few places. We've got a lot of dark sky parks for you and other dark places for you to chase the hobby with binoculars.
And there have been lots of meetings where people have talked about getting a new telescope and stuff like that. And the suggestion is, if you're looking to get a new telescope, try them out. If you go to one of these events where people have got their scopes set up, try them out, because that's why they're there. People love to have you test their scopes out, and you might find that you don't like the way one of these things works, and you like, or you have specific needs that you're looking for, astrophotography or not. And there's just a lot of different reasons to buy a telescope, and we don't want to see your telescope sit in a closet unused. So anyway, if you can join or renew your membership via PayPal or with Adrian here. We do. Okay.
Yeah, we have another new face.
And I found out about this
I've been interested in astrology my entire life, and I've been looking to pick up a hobby recently, and I figured why not jump more into astrology. And here I am. I'm here to learn. Astronomy.
I was gonna be more gentle about it. They can. So Bob, for those that, yeah, so those that are on the online, he says he wanted to pick up the hobby of astrology. Listen. Okay. And Ken took the words right out of my mouth. For those on the yeah, for those of us on the call, Ken then said, we appreciate astrology because if it wasn't for astrology, the science of astronomy wouldn't have come out. Astrology was an actual science at one point, and then, well, I'm a Scorpio, so I'm coming right behind him. So apparently, I don't know what that means, but yeah, when Venus is in Virgo, that might be a great month for all of the women out there, but for me, we look at Venus, and yeah, if that's happening, then we call it a conjunction, not a concern. So with that, Bob, take back over before we go off the rails any further. Thank you for coming to our meeting. We appreciate it.
Yes, we're always looking for new members interested in astronomy, and we've got people here who will talk your face off about astronomy because we like it so much. So if you want to renew or join, you can do it via PayPal or with Adrian there during the break. We have
one more.
We have another one. Really, 3 of them. Wow. Let's hear it.
Thanks. I didn't know there was an in-person option. So my name is Andrew. I discovered this meetup maybe a couple of months ago, and I've been looking for an opportunity to finally attend a meeting. And the stars aligned, and today's the day. So really excited to see what you all are putting together for us here. I think it's exciting.
We're a great bunch. I joined up in 2011, and I've only missed a couple meetings, and that was because of sickness or not around. So they're a great bunch. Yeah, so we
I do want to say real quick, Bob, I've interrupted you because you're not here, but we probably wouldn't want to hear. I wanted to say, Andrew, you were able to join us, and this was a pretty good night, as Ken will attest to. This was the first night we were ready, well in time for the hybrid meeting, and I'd like to give a hand to Vichalia for really taking this role.
Thank you.
We have a bona fide AV chair. And so, Andrew, one of the reasons you were able to join fairly easily was due to Vichalia continuing to work with our equipment until we finally got it done. Getting on Zoom may have been a part of this, but we think it was Vichalia's expertise. So
yeah, we
stage, Bob, or else I'll keep interrupting.
Wow, you keep dropping out, Adrian. Weird.
Check 1 2.
Yeah, so we started having our board meetings the week before. We used to have our board meetings before this meeting, an hour, and sometimes it jammed right up against the meeting and we ran out of time. And we started having our board meeting the week before via Zoom, and it was relaxed. We got a lot done, and we don't have to worry about being late for the meeting. So that worked out pretty well, I think. So anyway, we have a calendar coming out in 2024. If you have an astro photo or a photo of something in the sky or something really cool, you can send them to publications@warrenastro.org, and they will be considered for inclusion in our calendar for next year. And we typically print out about 60 or so of them, and I think we only have a couple left, if we have any at all. So we are going to be having the Astronomy at the Beach event at the end of September. GLAC meetings are held. They're not held on the second Thursday of the month. We moved into Monday. So if you would like to help plan the Astronomy at the Beach event, or just represent the WAS at these meetings, we would love to see you. So getting on to officers' reports, I don't have much. I'm home ill. But I'm researching a presentation right now that I'm going to be giving at the Detroit Public Library on the 29th, and I'm researching exoplanets, and I just cannot believe all the information out there right now. So the point where I find something interesting, create new slides, slap it at the bottom, and I'm going to organize all these things later. But wow, there's a lot of cool information on exoplanets out there, and I'll be generating some of my own. So Dale Parton, our first vice president, is he available? I don't see. Yes, he is. There he is. Hi, Dale. Oh, you're muted, Dale. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. My main job as first vice president is finding speakers for our meetings. I'm always looking for more speakers. You can have a full-length, kind of hour-long presentation or a 10 to 15-minute presentation. If you have something in mind, let me know. I'm always looking for more people, and I can help you a little bit if you need it. Okay, if you're not used to putting together a PowerPoint presentation or something like that. I do have one other thing. Well, before I say that, there was this little discussion a moment ago about astrology. Let me just say, I teach astronomy at Macomb Community College, and many of my students have, some of them think they signed up for an astrology class, okay? And so one of the things I teach when I teach the history of astronomy is I teach the difference between astrology and astronomy and how the two diverged with time. Ancient astrology was actually a religion. People thought it mattered where the sun was when you're born because the sun god made it matter. And, you know, there's the moon god who had more influence, the brighter the moon was, all that kind of stuff. Whereas astronomy is a science. So, but a lot of people have confusion between those two. I have one more thing. It's my privilege to tell you that I just received a letter from Macomb Community College. Several years ago, we set up a scholarship fund there, which we contribute to each year. It's called the Paul Strong Macomb Scholarship. Paul Strong was a professor at Macomb who really helped this organization for many years while he was a professor there, professor of physics and astronomy. He always made sure we had a place to meet, you know, and we could get the doors unlocked to get in for our evening meetings and all kind of stuff like that. So we named the scholarship after him, and we contribute $500 a year so the Macomb student can receive that as a scholarship. They did not award, for some reason, the scholarship the last year. So this year, I just got a letter saying that a student named Alexia Fields received $1,000 scholarship from us as the Paul Strong Macomb Scholarship. So I think that's really neat. Okay. The board received information on 11 different applicants for that scholarship, and we rated them, and then sent our rating back to the Macomb Community College. The student we rated the highest was the one who received the scholarship. Okay, so that's my report. Cheers.
We rock. Thanks, Dale. That's very good news. I can't even imagine what I would feel about getting $1,000 scholarship going through school. That's awesome. So Jeff McLeod, our second VP and observatory chair.
This is the computer mic, because this isn't doing anything.
Okay.
So, all right, I'll project. Damn it. All right. I see some people that were out at the open house last month. It looked pretty doom and gloom, but Riyadh kept insisting another half hour, another half hour. It'll clear in a half hour. We did that for about 2 hours. And then 10 o'clock, he was right. It cleared up. We had a great night. You should have been there. We saw things that would dazzle the mind and invigorate the imagination. It's actually a couple of weeks ago, so I can't even remember what we saw. But I bailed out about midnight. Riyadh stayed till 2 in the morning when they wrapped up viewing Saturn rising. So they had quite the night out there. Like I said, I guarantee clear skies. So this month it is the 26th. It's coinciding with the Kensington event. Come to Stargate. Better skies, better telescopes. We have some other stuff going on. So Bob mentioned the Stony Creek event. I will be out there with my Gemini simulator. If you want to get your astronaut wings, come on down. I will get you flying. You climb in. You got your hand on the joystick. You got Capcom talking to you. It's kind of hard to explain, but it sounds ridiculous, and it is. I built a spaceship. So I'll be there, but Riyadh will be at Stargate for our Perseid event. So if you're looking for a little bit more intimate, not as many maybe children running around, once again, better telescopes. Riyadh's going to be out there. We're going to be looking for shooting stars. So come out to that. What else is going on? Oh, he mentioned astronomy at the beach. I just wanted to also say we're looking for volunteers. WAS is going to have 2 tables, and we're going all out this year. We got tablecloths, table runners with the logo, pop-up banners, pry folds. We're the club to beat this year, okay? So if you want to help us run the table, that would be much appreciated. If you want to help us run our telescope, we got the big Dob that we're going to trailer out. I need people to run it because, again, I'll be running my spaceship. So please let me know. That would help us out a lot. I also, okay, yes, I'm fielding questions now.
What did you say?
29. 2 for 50.
And every Saturday, the 26th of the month.
4th Saturday of the month. This month it's the 26th.
The expert.
It's all in the newsletter or the website, or get at me at the break.
This Saturday night is an event.
Correct.
So we play Metro Park.
Stony Creek, looking at stuff.
Get on and what is happening there?
Well, so it's an overnight event that if you want to camp out, you need to reserve a spot. I don't think you actually need to reserve a spot to enjoy what we're going to do there. Just get into Stony Creek, talk to the person at the gate. I don't remember the exact location. It's up on the northeast side.
Just bring it on with a single telescope. Tell them what's
I
happening.
have no idea who's coming out there. I know I'm bringing my spaceship. Someone is bringing telescopes, but I don't know who they are.
I can
That's up
answer
to-
those questions.
Perseid, right?
Yes, it's for the Perseids.
You have one major, couple of good ones, but one major shuttle. And we call it Perseid shuttle. Direction coming out of Perseid. Before the advantage, one of the things we can have over 100 hours, 2 hours in front. 5 hours, but the third thing you know about.
I don't think anyone can hear.
Is the earth turns into a orbit in the orbit itself. After a night, when we
peak of that is gonna be there from 2 in the morning. And it's nice, you're gonna get to see something nice. You get there at 11, you leave at 12, you're not gonna get.
Okay, so with that in mind, go to Stargate, because Stargate will be open later. The Metro Park, if you don't have a camping pass, they're gonna kick you out at midnight.
You want to go ahead and do that as well.
Am I making sense? No,
This Saturday night, when the observer.
no, I'm not. We are going to Stargate this Saturday night as well. We have a Perseid event. Riyadh will be there. He will open up the observatory. We're there this Saturday and the fourth Saturday.
One other thing also about that, you want to bring out launch it or something like that? Watch the Perseid, look through a telescope. All right, because that's visual. You can get out there and just sit down there and look up and you walk every minute of it.
Online, I wasn't certain if I need my Metro Parks pass. I don't think I have one yet this year.
For coming to Stargate, no, you don't need a pass. For Stony Creek, you'll need to pay to get into the park. But Camp Rotary, you can get in. You're not gonna have an issue. Now, because everyone made something about astrology, I'm gonna also make a comment about astrology. That's the right word. That's what we do. The study of, not the astronomy, which is the pursuit of or something else. Anyway, one last thing. Bob Berta, are you actually on a beach?
I'm in my office. It's my back.
You're faking it quite well. Okay. All right, now I have to, did I actually cover all that I need to cover?
Looking at their moonrise.
Don't worry about the moonrise. The 12th, the moon is actually going to be minuscule. Like it's going to be a decent night for looking at Perseids. Yeah. All right. Now open house. We got stuff. That one. Astronomy of the beach volunteer. Okay. Yes.
So at Stony Creek Metro Park, is it in the camping section that you guys will be set up with campsites are, or are you get them separate?
Bob.
Oh, I can get you that. Hold on. Of course, that's the one thing I did not have open here.
It's Ridgewood. Am I right? Ridgewood?
Ridgewood, yeah, Ridgewood campsite. That's it. Huge campsite. They've got spots for campers and stuff like that. Huge places to set up telescopes. They're going to have a tent. They're going to have like 10 tables, so probably more than we need. And
This Saturday.
Yep.
The 12th. And then there's another one. So the Metro Park is confusing us because on the 26th, there's also a Metro Park event at Kensington, the same night as the open house. So you have to decide, you can't do both.
well, they only need one person to do, well, 1 or 2 people with telescopes for sky tours, and that's it. So
Okay, so
they
that's
don't
much
need,
smaller.
they don't need a ton of people. Yeah.
I'm walking away now.
Bye. Thank you. So, Treasurer Adrian and Astronomical League. What we got in the bank?
All right, back again. We're still sitting somewhere between $28,000 and $29,000 in the bank. The report is in the WASP. We're a little less light because I had to pay Mark back for all the food, snacks, things. Oh, and we also procured the banquet hall. They wanted a fairly sizable donation, so we took care of that. Mark has the card, so I've been checking the bank every day to make sure that brand new telescope hasn't been bought yet. If he buys it, I want a copy of it.
Dinner there, the 11th. There's a gigantic room that they rent. Where the next divided side room for the last thing like that. Where you can hear the speaker and everything. Have you booked the appropriate room?
I believe Mark is doing his best to make sure that the Yep. Okay. All right. So those that did not hear, there's a very strong request to make sure we are in a quieter room, not a large banquet hall, such as I've been paid in my side gig to perform in. But anyway, it's Mark is going to check into that and he's going to talk about it in his report. Meanwhile, Astronomical League, as I mentioned prior to the start of the meeting, there was ALCON, which is a conference for the Astronomical League in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And there were a lot of special guests, two that are near and dear to me, David Eicher and David Levy. David Levy is usually one of our guests, but we've heard some news about David that he may be recovering from a stroke. David Levy, for those that are new and don't know why we keep saying, who is David Levy? Is he a football player? No. David Levy was the name Levy behind the comet Shoemaker-Levy was David Levy. He and his dear friends, Ernest and Gene, or Jeff, what was it? Ernest Shoemaker?
Gene
That doesn't
Shoemaker.
sound right. Gene Shoemaker. Gene and Carol Shoemaker and David Levy discovered Shoemaker-Levy 9, which was a comet that in the 90s slammed into Jupiter in several parts. They were the first to notice that comet as it had broken apart, and they noticed through different watching it in its orbit that it was en route to hit Jupiter, and it became a big event. So he was there. There were other members of Explore Scientific. The president of Explore Scientific, who was also a friend of mine, Scott Roberts, did some live streaming there. It was a good event, and there were talks that were recorded. The Astronomical League, and I'll go sit down after this. I'm going to put it up here, because I can never remember. There it is, astroleague.org. Now, for those of you that are new, what's good about the Astronomical League is whether you're new to astronomy or you're a seasoned amateur astronomer or even a professional astronomer, it's a good organization to be a part of because there are a number of awards that you can win. You could look them up. Whatever I just did. There's a patch. They have Reflector magazine, which is, it's a magazine recognizing various images, various various things you can do, monthly sky charts, and somewhere, the observing programs, organizing and planning, outreach. There's a lot here that helps get you on your way. You're new to astronomy. This is a good website to visit to get started. Observing programs, anything from objects that you can see in binoculars, you can see in not so good skies like we have in Michigan 300 of the 365 days a year. You're going to want to go back to Florida after this. But you've got observing lists for that. And then if you go to Mississippi, like my friend back there who has seen a dark sky, you have observing lists for that are more faint and tougher to see. So definitely check out the Astronomical League. There's a website, astroleague.org. Of course, I'm not sharing that to anyone, but
I put it in the chat.
Yeah, there we go. So now I'm sharing it to so that it'll be visible to everyone else. There's the Astronomical League. There are awards you can win. So with that, I will stop the share, and Bob, let's move on to our next officer.
All right, so our next officer is our secretary, Mark Kedzier. Is he online?
Yes, he is here.
Oh, he's there. Okay.
Yep. And we're gonna, all right, switch off.
All right, good evening, everyone. Number one, we had a nice picnic, even though it was a small turnout. I think everybody enjoyed the food. I enjoyed cooking it. And we had some nice weather, a nice breeze. So that's the picnic report right there. Questions about the banquet, Monday, December 11th. Ukrainian Cultural Center from 6 to 11, cash bar. And somebody questioned about the size of the room. The room that we had at our last live banquet that we had less than 50 people. That small room that we had it in held that. For over 50 people, we go to a larger room. Okay. If you want to have a nice comfy thing with 75 people in that small room, you'll probably have 11 people at each round table. That is not conducive to a nice, comfortable banquet. So let's sell some tickets. The board will meet, come up with the ticket price, and we'll have that for you in next month's WASP. And at the next meeting, we'll report those prices and we'll have the entire menu set out for us. That's all I have to report.
Thank you, Mark. And thanks again, Mark, for doing all the research and getting that booked. Thank you so much. So our outreach is Kevin McLaughlin there. Kevin, outreach.
That's a negative.
Oh, okay. Well, so we had some. I noticed I saw some scouts asking for something on the 11th. I don't know if that got handled. I thought that Jeff replied to them saying we're having a big thing on the 12th, but doesn't help them. But they're there the 11th. I know. All right. So publications. Dale Teamy, who is online.
Hello.
He's our award-winning newsletter editor. I put a link to our newsletter in the chat. If you are new, take a look at that because it's a very good newsletter and has jam-packed with interesting information. All right, special interest groups, as was mentioned, David Levy is not here, unfortunately. He might have had a small stroke, and I'm hoping that he gets better soon and we see him again because it's a privilege to have him here. Is Marty in the audience? Did he show up? Can he do a solo report? Otherwise, I will. You know, he's not there. All right. Well, as I've said many times before, I have a solar app from spaceweather.com on my smartphone, and my phone is like vibrating off the table with flares. And there was an X 1.6 class flare on the 5th, and I heard that there was another one today. So the sun is blowing off the highest class flares, and it's causing a lot of CME. My wife was telling me that she also has this app installed, and she was saying that it was causing radio blackouts over North America. And oddly enough, she and my daughter were having problems with their cell phones today. So yes, the sun's very active. Riyadh, any double star report for the last outing?
Yeah, we've been actually trying to do as much observing as we can whenever the sky has been clearing up. And we've lucked out, you know, sometimes you got to stay a little while and clouds will sometimes come in or move and we get chances to observe in between. So I've been looking a lot at double stars, and also earlier in the year we were looking at Venus, and now we just started looking at Saturn. And I'm hoping that in the next open house or so, if it stays clear late, we'll also wait long enough for Jupiter. So we'll also be looking at the moon. So if you have the time to come out, come and join us. We have a lot of observing to do, and it's an awful lot of fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Riyadh. Yeah, our observatory is really cool, and if you haven't been there, you should. It's really good. So that is it for special interest groups. Does anybody else have anything? Like I know somebody wanted to start a radio group. I don't know if that's ever happened, but there's computers and technology, education, light pollution, podcasting. If anybody's interested in doing any of these things, let's get to talking about it. So at this point, we can go in. What do you got?
Some astrophotography
Yeah, observing reports.
mentioned
So
some
that's where we
astro-
are.
Yeah,
I'm here right now, if you can hear me.
Oh,
David has
David,
made it.
hi
Yes, we can
there.
hear you.
Hope you are
Well,
Can
feeling
you hear
better.
me?
Hi there. Yes.
Great. I've been on and I even was there when you said I wasn't there.
Oh, well, I'm just
But
Oh,
I'm
you
checking. I
can
fine
didn't
if
your
you
see
can hear
you.
face,
me.
David, but we hear you loud. Take it
Okay,
away.
I do have a little quotation for you today. You're right, I did probably have a little TIA stroke over the summer, and I was in emergency a couple of times, but I'm doing much, much better now. And I hope to be around for a while. So I'm going to quote to you tonight from Thomas Campbell's 1799 poem, The Pleasures of Hope, Part 1. At summer eve, when heaven's ethereal bow spans with bright arch the glittering hills below, why to yon mountain turns the musing eye, whose sun-bright summit mingles with the sky? And I'm really enjoying being here, and thanks for letting me speak.
Thanks, David. Hope you feel
All the
better.
time. Yeah,
Thank you.
everyone in the crowd, David. You can hear the
Thank you.
applause. Yep, we all want
Nice.
you to continue to get better. Now, as far as what's up in the sky, I'm going to do a quick segment. A late waning crescent moon rises with Jupiter and Uranus in what appears to be a pretty close grouping. I don't know if I'll be up at 1:34 in the morning to see that, but that will happen throughout the week. For those who may have heard, I kind of like doing Milky Way photography. And some of the great binocular objects are in the southern sky. Just gonna look at this. I'm gonna go backwards. So at 11, Milky Way stands up. I will just do this because why not? I'll show an image. And we'll go here. And these are, this is a Perseid. Let me share screen with those of you on Zoom. Find it. Oh, they don't see it yet because I'm not sharing my screen. There we go. Share the screen and we'll share this. Okay. And get me to here. So this was a Perseid from 2019, I think. Best way to look at the Perseus, notice I'm looking south near the Milky Way. Perseus is directly behind me. North comes up under Cassiopeia, which it looks like the big W. But they streak overhead. If you look at Perseus, that's where the radiant is. But if you look south, you'll see them streaking from everywhere, and including if you look for this band, you may not see all of this detail depending on where you are, but that's where you'll see Perseids. I have another series of Perseids that was somewhere in the Upper Peninsula. That's pretty much what the Milky Way looks like. So the darker the skies, the more you notice there's like a difference in some of these Milky Way shots. At Point O'Bark Lighthouse Park, the same place, probably a little more better processing, but look at all this glow from Fort Huron and in Canadian lights. Those of you new to astronomy, you'll hear about light pollution as being, part of an issue. You want to go see the aurora, you can see it. So we've had all these reports of the sun is blowing its top and lots of mass ejections are coming. When it's a large enough storm, you can go to this part in the thumb, and if you're lucky, you'll see something looking very similar to what I took a picture of here in March. It is you will not see quite as much detail naked eye. You'll notice the sky is moving, but just about any camera, even your smartphone, and you'll get these glimpses of images like you see here. This is the lighthouse. This gives you an idea of how beautiful it looks. Now, during the summer, there's a whole bunch of other people there. So if you're aurora hunting, you don't have to go far. It's between, I would say from here, especially, it's around maybe 2.5 hours to get to areas in the thumb. September zodiacal light. This is the image on sale at Point O'Bark Lighthouse Park with the freighter and the partial eclipse. Now, the other point I'll make, there's a Perseid, there is the Milky Way. This is here in Alcona. Go somewhere dark. Last time when we were here and I was taking pictures, I would say once every 6 or 7 seconds we saw another meteor. We had the Perseids are typically that good. You see, I think every picture from that night there's a streak. So when if you're image like me, you'll catch more meteors just by luck because they're coming all the time. Even on a like if there's no meteor shower, there's still a meteor about once an hour, sometimes once every half hour, something comes streaking through. So this one, meteor, distant storm. I wish I had done this image a lot more justice. Now, what I want to, I'll take this image to finish this report. Here you've got the center of the galaxy standing up the way that at around 11 or so, 11 p.m. You may not see all of this. This is a lot of detail taken with a wide, fast lens. And there's little things here like the cat's paw and the lobster claw. You may not see those, but you can see all of these star clusters, M6, M7, M8, there's a star cluster. You can see it in binoculars. You may not see this nebulosity. M22, a globular cluster, appears right here. You'll see it really easily. This is where Sagittarius is. These are the stars of Sagittarius. You'll see those stars, and if you point your binoculars here, you'll see a small, dim, fuzzy thing, just like you see in this image. This is actually M20. This is a tough thing to see. M23, a nice, rich, open star cluster. I think M25 is this star cluster here, and I missed, this is M17. M16 is further up north. If you can find this band where the center of our galaxy is, which is right about here, this is a place called Body's Window. This region in particular, where I've got my arrow, was a subject of survey of exoplanets. And I forget the name of the survey, but they aimed telescopes right in that bright region and looked for planets because it's the one place in this mess of a galactic center where there's not much dust and they could see clear through. So you can take your binoculars and you can walk all the way up. You can walk all the way up this part of the Milky Way here. In darker regions, you see dark nebula, but even in Michigan, you can take your binoculars and you can go right up the side of the Milky Way. So that's enough of the photos and things I like to do at star parties. This is the lighthouse again in winter, or in this part of fall, where you see the Milky Way starts to fall. You get into September, you start getting into zodiacal light, and there's a picture of that somewhere too, but I think not to take up any more time, I will go ahead and sit down. If you want to see more of these photos, just come find me.
Anyone else online have any pictures they can share?
Yeah. Wait, what did I shoot recently?
Bob, anything new?
Yeah, I've got one picture I can show. Let me see if I can share it.
Yeah, this is what I was gonna, oh darn it. You know what, Bob? Forget it. I'll show my stuff later. Take over.
Here, if I can do it here. Okay, can you,
It's getting there. There you go.
Wow.
Nice.
yeah. This was taken, this is a 4-panel mosaic, and it covers an area of sky 7 degrees by 5 degrees. And this was taken with my 80mm refractor from my backyard, which is on 25 Mile and Hayes. This was 2 days before full moon and light polluted and everything else. But the thing is cool. They've got filters now that allow you to get pictures of nebula like this from a really horrible spot, like where I live now. I'm about, I'm at 25 Mile Road in Hayes, to give you an idea of where I live. That's our observatory is at 29 Mile Road and Romeo Plank. So it gives you an idea about where I live. Can you see my cursor here, the green one?
Yes.
Okay, this down here is the Propeller Nebula. And so a lot of these areas, if you zoom into them, you get an incredible amount of detail in here. But I wanted to do a mosaic using on the latest, I guess, firmware updates, which is a beta update to the ASI Air. You can now use that to do mosaics. It will set up, you can tell it, I want to do a, 2x2, whatever mosaic. It will automatically turn itself on, go to each one of those panels. It'll take whatever the number of pictures you want to take at each location, then you end up with that in all those individual pictures. Then what I do is I take them from there. There's many ways you can do this. I go into Photoshop and I use, there's a part of Photoshop allows you to, is automatic photo merge, I believe it's called, auto photo merge. And it goes through, and if you have your pictures, you pick just a stack of pictures, even if you have them in no particular order, it will go through and do a pretty good job of aligning them and finding out where they go. The big key thing I found, this is the first one I made doing that, and you have to really, every single frame you do, you have to leave it unmessed with. Don't go in there and start cropping it or whatever. Just leave the thing as it is. And I did use, there in Photoshop, there's a, I guess, a plugin you can buy, you have to buy it outside. It's called Gradient Exterminator. If you take each individual picture and use that on it, it gets pretty close to matching them up very well. So it makes it a little bit easier. It's easier if you have nebula across the picture like I did here. Even with this, though, there's one area, I think it was up higher up in this area, it had a little bit harder time trying to figure out where to go, but you can kind of fit them in by hand. I spent a lot of time, actually 12 hours just on this picture, just figuring out how to make that assembly work. I think now I know enough about it now that I can probably do it much, much faster now. But, that was quite a exercise in assembling the mosaic. The actual taking the images wasn't bad. These are 5-minute exposures. I think I did six 5-minute exposures at each piece. So I did this within, I think it was about 3-hour total imaging time. And again, this is all done just automatically with my little software in the ASI Air Pro. So I intend to do some more of this down the road, especially when I get up in the UP. I think it's next month. A bunch of us are going up there in the Oakland Astronomy Club. We're camping out up there for a weekend. So I'm going to try to get some without the nebula filter and see how I do up there, a little bit darker skies. Anyway, that's it.
Very nice. Submitting that to the calendar, Bob?
Actually, I just got a flash that I guess our editor just wrote to me and said, hey, I took the free, I decided I'm going to put on the calendar. So I guess he already did.
Nice.
I also have that picture. I think I showed you the Thursday meeting, but I didn't show it this one before. This is the, see if I can show it on here. May not be able to do it right there. Let me stop it just 1 second here. Go back here and do it again. Hold on 1 second.
You're making me want to go to the beach, Bob.
Okay, now let's see if I can do it again here. Okay, this should be,
Well, see, I did you one better, Bob. I was at a real beach, I think, last month's meeting. I was in Canada and looking for sunset pictures, and I streamed the entire meeting from my phone while the beach, the Point Pelee National Park was behind me. So
okay, let's see if I can get this to work now. Okay, it should be this one here. Yeah, can you see that? The
yep,
solar.
we see it. Solar,
Wow.
yep.
Yeah, this was, again, taken with an 80mm refractor from my backyard using a Daystar chromosphere, which is a H-alpha setup, all self-contained. It just fits on the back of your scope. Actually, it doesn't work very well for visually use. I found it's kind of a pain in the dusty trying to use it that way. For pictures, though, it gives outstanding results. What I'm doing is, again, I'm going to be at the Oakland Club meeting, and the people are up there. I'm doing a presentation to show how you do the solar images and how you process them and everything. But the nice thing about that is that we get a lot more sunny days than we do clear nights around here. And plus, no mosquitoes.
Bonus.
True. So I should say never look at the sun without proper solar equipment.
Important
if there-
safety tip.
Yeah, if there's a lot of smoke and you notice you can kind of look at the sun through
Don't.
the haze, I would be real careful about that just
Oh, yeah.
because I know how much the one thing that can happen to you is without you knowing it, you start burning your corneas.
That's
There's a
right.
lot of bright light coming from there.
Yep. In fact, I learned from Ken Burton, if you took the sun,
Yeah,
you completely
Let's
blanked
see if he
out
said
the
what you were
entire
gonna say.
surface, but left a little pinhole in it, there'd be just as much bright light coming from that teeny pinhole into your eye as at the whole sun. So don't look at the sun.
Yeah. Yep, Ken is in here repeating what you just said.
Yep.
Yep.
All right, so I think we
Hang
need
on,
to
Bob.
have our first presentation, our short presentation by Jeff.
By the way, sunspots, if they were out in space, you couldn't look at them. And the reason they're black, because they're up against something that is much more temperature. And so that when it looks like there's a black spot. Yeah, how much are you? You don't have to be.
Okay, where'd Jeff? There's Jeff. Okay, for a short presentation, I'm going to give you a little on Jeff. Jeff McLeod has been the president of this organization. He's currently the observatory chairman and a regular at outreach events, as well as we're about to see behind the podium. During his time recently at Wayne State University, he was a presenter in their planetarium while he was getting a double bachelor's degree in physics and astronomy. He recently started working in the aerospace sector, simulating missiles. I wonder if that's how he got into this Gemini spacecraft thing he's working on. All right. Anyhow, he says I can't go into more detail on his work because it's classified. Nowadays, most of his free time is spent working on his space flight simulator, a life-size recreation of a Gemini spacecraft you can actually fly in, sort of. I don't think you'll be going into orbit with it. His title tonight is Locating Apollo Landing Sites. Did we really land on the moon?
Where did I put it? Was, sorry. Is this a touchscreen? Okay. Sorry, I should have done this presentations. Locating Apollo insights, and then the, oh, that's the PDF. Oh, no, sorry. Sorry, I should have had that going before we. That should be. Perfect. You can, oh, is there a way I can see my cursor? I'm gonna be circling stuff. I guess I don't need the presenter mode. Sir.
Keep moving it until it gets over there. I think you're in two screen mode. So it should show. There it goes. There you go.
Yeah, but I can't see on my screen where it is.
That's because you're in a two screen mode. That's your second screen.
Oh, is,
Yeah, it's your second screen. So you would have to turn around and actually.
all right, I'll manage. All right, yeah, we'll just roll. I'll figure out a way. Okay, so I go all the way over here. All right. Right. Well, I was like, oh, I'll use a pointer, and then I'm like, oh, well, the people in the internet box won't be able to see me. You can dim the lights for me. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, locating lunar landing site. How close can we actually get to seeing something? This is a challenge presentation. Gary Ross, I'm looking at you. This is for the true observer. Astrophotographers, you will not stack your way out of my problems. Okay, computers will not help you. Visual observers, this is a challenge for you as well. Not for the faint of heart, but doable. Okay, I've handled my inner Gary Ross enough. We'll just go to the next one. All right. If you choose to do this, I highly recommend you get some sort of lunar map. Orion sells a laminated one that is quite nice. This is a very blurry photo of it. The real one is nicer. 10, 20 bucks, I don't know, very affordable. If you're like me and do not want to pay any money to do anything, Wikipedia has a great lunar map that can get you to these places. You click on the thing, you see the images. Some of these images are in this presentation.
Jeff, I'm only seeing the first screen. I'm not seeing the presentation shared. There we go. We had it.
Are you seeing my presenter notes and everything? Or are you just seeing the main slide? Stunned silence. Okay.
We're seeing a presenter mode.
We're seeing presenter mode. All right. Does anyone know how to get me out of presenter mode? Because I don't need presenter mode. See all slides. Pen, laser pointer. One of these. More slideshow options. Hide presenter view. Boom. Is that better?
Yes.
That's it.
You know, Apollo didn't they didn't land on the moon on the first try either. They did. So all right. So Wikipedia. I want to hide this as well. Can I hide this? This will also get you there. It's a good resource. Okay. So what I have here is a flattened view of most of the near side. Do we all recognize the near side? Yes. Okay, good. Some notable features: Copernicus, fantastic crater, pretty easy to see. Tycho down out of the frame, not quite there. Our main Maria, and the idea of this presentation is you can reference this presentation to do these observations. So Apollo 11, we're starting in the Tranquil Sea, down in the lower left. lower right, whatever, that's backwards to me. All right, so I start with a not very good picture of the moon, okay? Because this is what you might see with a modest telescope. So what we are going to do, we've got a very bright crater way off to the left, two larger craters over here. I'm going to draw, whoops, I went too far. All right, well, there's my lines. We're going to draw a line out. This is really hard. To this crater, and then we're going to draw a line from these small craters up to this larger one. And then right at the intersection is our landing site. Now, again, I said, this is a bad photo. This is not when you would want to be making this observation. You would be doing this under better seeing conditions. But can you see there's like a small crater here, a small crater here, and a small crater here?
Yep.
Yes, yes. That is Aldrin, Armstrong, and Collins crater. They're all rather small. So if we get a better night to view, we get longer shadows, we can see a little bit better. We zoom in on Collins crater here, and this next photo is this box in the red. So I go over here, Collins crater. All this weird UFO stuff, these are artifacts. That's not actually on the moon. So don't expect to see that. It's just in the photo, don't worry. Collins crater, 1.5 miles, okay? We go down to the cat's paw, and then this little itty bitty guy is West Crater. We zoom in on West Crater, we go west, we get Little West Crater, 130 feet across. We go a little bit west of West Crater, and we actually get to the descent module. That is Apollo 11. That is how you find it. Now, how feasible is it that you're going to be able to find this? Okay. I won't break down the math. Some of you are ahead of me. There is a limit to how well or how fine of detail you can see through a particular scope, and you can't stack photos and get more resolution. So this is with an 8-inch telescope. We plug in some numbers. The moon's pretty far away. We get 1.1 kilometers is the absolute limit of an 8-inch telescope. That is perfect conditions, perfect lens, your perfect mirror, whatever, you're not going to get it, okay? That's pretty darn small. However, 0.7 miles, so that Collins crater, 1.5 miles, might be doable, right at the ragged edge. Now, if you have a bigger telescope, makes it a little easier. So the big dot out at Stargate, we pointed at the moon. What can we get down to? 0.4 kilometers. Good. Hubble Space Telescope, 280 feet. Okay. Lunar module is only like 30 feet across, 24 some feet. Ain't no way. Not from Earth. Okay. So just bear that in mind. You're never going to, this is like the question, like, why can't I see the flag? It's the resolution limit of like trying to see something from Earth. All right. So bear that in mind. I'm just now going to identify the craters that you might be able to see. We're not going to zoom all the way down into the actual module. So Apollo 12, because it's so hard for me to point, I'm just going to skip to the lines here. There's a triangle down here. Here, do I need to go back? Okay. Apollo 12, down and to the left, down and to the left. Take Copernicus straight down, and you'll get in the vicinity. We've got a big crater up here. I think it's Lanesburg. And then we have this triangle of craters, almost a perfect right triangle. Beautiful. We draw a line. We've got two other small craters, intersect those. If you see very carefully, again, this is a poor photo in bad seeing conditions. There's another triangle of craters right here. And that landing site's right about there. So we zoom in, we can see this triangle of craters. You might be able to see those craters. Beyond that, I don't think you have a prayer. So I couldn't get sizes on all these. It's kind of hard to find data. So head crater, this really small guy here, only about 400 feet across. That means that, you know, these guys are in the sub-mile. They're pretty darn small. But these guys, I think we could see them if we tried. 13 didn't make it. Okay. The 14 is a hop, skip, and a jump from 12. We go back to our triangle of craters, and we're going to go off in this direction now. And this one, there's kind of a bunch of different ways that you can get there. We also there's triangles everywhere. You make a triangle out of these three guys right here. You can also connect these guys, but there's these two main, and right in the center of all those guys is another just possibly visible crater right at the ragged edge. But I also want to point out this thing, you got to check this out. This has got to look awesome through a telescope on the right day. It's a crater that took out the top of a mountain. That's got to be awesome. So I want to see pictures of that from y'all photographers. So yeah, cone crater, 1,000 feet. No way. Unless you got something huge. We're at what? 15. I think it's blocked. It's up here. Up in the north, in the highlands. Possibly one of the easier ones, because we got a big crater here, straight down to this bright crater here. We go right in the middle. Can you guys see this little ribbon here? If you guys are seeing that from your seats, I feel like we might be able to do this. So yeah, we just draw a line. We find that ribbon. This is the Taurus Littrow, right? Or no, this is the Hadley Rill. So that's Hadley crater, 3.7 miles. Should be real doable. 8-inch telescope. I mean, it's not going to be like jumping out at you, but you should be able to locate it. And then I think yeah, St. George here, 1.5 miles, same size as Collins crater. The right phasing, I think we can see Hadley Rill, and then that landing site is right there, right where the flag is. Super easy to see. All right, 16. We're down and to the right. So you're going to crater hop, right? You're going to have to get this map out, and it's easy how I'm doing it, but your moon is going to be upside down and sideways, and your scope is going to be shaking. It's going to be difficult, guys. So again, very washed out photo. This, like no long shadows helping us, but this is just so that we can practice at how difficult this is. So we have 3 craters here. We kind of see a triangle here. And again, you're going to identify this big crater. You're going to hop over to this smaller one. Then you're going to count these 3, and you're going to know it's like right under there. So again, we draw some lines, name of some craters, Kant crater, Descartes. We got some philosophers, some mathematicians. These guys, I think they're all too small. I mean, these are all, that's just about 1 kilometer. So yeah, maybe, I don't know. This is tough. You let me know. But these 3 guys, 6.8 miles, you should be able to find Dollins and these other 2 craters. And then you'll know by just kind of making an equilateral triangle out of this guy, or maybe it's more isosceles, but it's going to be right up here. Like, draw a line from this guy over. Like, you're going to know you're in the ballpark. All right, and finally, 17, another potentially easier one. We're right on the edge of these 2 mare. We got a bright little crater here, bigger crater down here, straight line. You see this little triangle right here? Our landing site's right there. So we draw some lines. You can also use these 2 guys to kind of get you another line to intersect. Again, you got to get the right phasing so that these features pop out at you. I think you might be able to see this mount. I don't think you're going to see these craters. Camelot, 2,000 feet. That's darn small. But this mount is significantly larger. You find that mount, it's right in the valley in between these 2 guys. So that is it. That is the challenge. Do one? I don't know. I'm trying. It's difficult, but that's what I got for you guys. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And at this point, we take a short snack break and reconvene at 8:15. So it's going to be a very short snack break. So go do bio, get a refill of a drink, and reconvene in just a few minutes. I'm going to get more coffee.
In the back there, yeah. Just check the sky. Oh, because I'm using it, yeah. It's just. Oh, thank you. Boy, she's in there.
Hello, hello, at 8:15, we ready to have our feature presentation? Okay, we're gonna be reconvening at about 8:30. We're gonna give it another 10 minutes for a snack break. You're muted, Adrian. Adrian, that PC is muted.
All right, now everyone can hear me on the talk, but all I'm doing is blabbing and showing more images to those that are here. Yeah, so we're good, and we're about to start anyway, so it's time to unmute. All righty. I'll see you. Yep. Oh, and this is what I wanted to show you right quick. I apparently didn't take some true to life photos that trip around, but yes. Yeah. Now you see this photo. That was taken with a camera, a stock camera with no filters removed. When there's enough light. Now you can barely see. You don't see as much color in these, but it does come through. HA light comes through. The filter just blocks the ton of light that comes through during, that normally comes through. It picks it up. For astro stuff, it makes things, this was without, it gets a standard camera, both filters, and you can still get these colors from Aurora. So it's not depending on what you're looking for, makes all the difference. So those of you that were wondering what I was doing, I was sharing this image, and this is one of the few images I really like that I took with a standard DSLR that wasn't modified for astronomy. The darker your location, the more light you get from space, and you even get some of the hydrogen alpha color. Get your focus together, and you get a pretty good image. Astro cameras always are filterless. All of the light can come through. This is the Upper Peninsula, and that's why, Bob, you're going to the Upper Peninsula, because you'll see this. It's really good up there. You can see how black the clouds are here. That's how you know you're in a pretty dark area. So with that, let me turn it back over to our VP.
So is this muted? Okay.
Nope, I hear you just fine.
So is our speaker online?
Yes, I'm online.
Okay, great. So we're honored tonight to have Dr. Paul Lynam, or is it Lynam?
Lynam.
Lynam. He's an astronomer at Lick Observatory, part of the University of California. He's been into amateur astronomy since he was a kid, traveled worldwide to work with frontline observatories, educated in the United Kingdom, investigated the effects of meteoroids on space platforms, such as the Space Shuttle and the Hubble Space Telescope. He received a PhD in 2000 for research involving brightest cluster galaxies and cosmic flows. He has also worked at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, and at the Very Large Telescope in Chile. His topic tonight is the history and science of the James Lick Observatory. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you for the introduction. I hope you are able to see the presentation.
Can people hear me? Can people see the presentation?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'm going to start off with a quote, which is one of the memorable quotes from somebody who actually helped build the observatory here on Mount Hamilton. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the observatory came to be and how it focused American astronomy and how American astronomy pivoted around the facility of Lick Observatory. So if you were hacking somebody's phone or trying to get some headlines, you would probably want to know the history of the observatory, because it's a history that's filled with scandal, intrigue, foreign adventures, war, heartbreak, wealth, and vengeance. And it's a story of a man who is variously described as somebody who was honest, often moody, strong, wiry, selfish, maybe, miserly, afraid to live. The politician said that he had a powerful and unsymmetrically developed mind, but the less political people just said that he was touched in the head. The meanest man in California. And the story actually doesn't start in California. It starts only about 5 miles away from Hershey, Pennsylvania, in about 1796, when a young man by the name of James was the oldest child born to John Henry Luck, a Pennsylvania Dutch immigrant, and his wife, Sarah. He grew up in a town called Stumpstown, which was later renamed Fredericksburg. And it was a podunk town then. And with respect, it's still a pretty small town now. But James grew up as an apprentice to his father, who was a wood craftsman and carpenter in this small town. And he learned his father's skills working in wood. James's mother died while he was still a teenager, and that shaped his thoughts a little bit. His mother was a horticulturist. She was very interested in the garden. And James also was an animal lover. He had a pet rabbit and so on. And another event that occurred in his early 20s was that he fell in love with a local girl by the name of Barbara Snavely. And Barbara's father was the local miller in this small community. So he was a very powerful man. And we get an insight into James's character, the young James Lake's character, because he went to Barbara's father and asked for her hand in marriage. To which the miller replied, "Have you a penny in your purse? Only when you have a mill as large and as costly as mine can you have my daughter's hand in marriage." Then we see the second insight into James's character, because he didn't take to being condescended to very well. And he made the miller a promise that someday he would make a mill or have a mill that would make the millers look like a pigsty. And he left town, and the story goes, to go and seek his fortune, he started with $1 in his pocket. And he went to a few places, including Baltimore, where he crossed paths with, he reportedly may have been around during the attack at the fort there, and he met Francis Scott Key. But profiting from his skills as a carpenter that he'd learned from his father, he was making the cases for pianos, and he wound up in New York City, and he found that the pianos, as his skills grew, were not staying in New York City. There was no German luxury automobiles as a status symbol at that time. You had a status symbol to have a piano in your withdrawing room. And James noticed that none of his pianos were staying in New York, but they were being exported to the then developing Paris of the South in Buenos Aires, current day Argentina. So an insight into James's business acumen was that he negotiated with the captain of a ship to relocate his business lock, stock and barrel down to Buenos Aires, and he obtained free passage by fitting a piano in the captain's cabin. Journey didn't quite go according to plan. It was blown off course a few times, and it landed twice in Africa to pick up minerals and so on. And eventually, after 15 weeks at the rail of the ship, James arrived in Buenos Aires and set up business in a very politically unstable time, the year of anarchy in Buenos Aires. He settled into a business about 3 streets behind what is the Casa Colorado, or the Casa Rosada now, the balcony of which Eva Peron addressed the crowds from. And he proceeded to prosper, filling the homes of the rich and wealthy with pianos. He prospered so much that he was only about in his late 20s, early 30s when he decided to embark upon the grand tour of Europe. So he left his business in the care of a colleague, and at the age of 29, in fact, set sail to retrace some of his heritage. As I said, his father was a Pennsylvania Dutch immigrant. He went to Europe, He landed first at Falmouth in the UK, or England at that time, and one of the first places he visited with his inherited interest in horticulture was the Palm House at Royal Kew Gardens just outside London. Then he crossed the English Channel and he went to the Palace of Versailles just outside of Paris. And he also went to the Low Countries, the Netherlands. Now, at this time, people would set aside months or even years of their life to do the grand tour of Europe, but James was only there for a few weeks before retracing his steps, and we don't really know why. But in any case, he reboarded a ship to head back to South America, and we know that from the logs that just off the coast of North Africa, the ship ran into a storm, a man was washed overboard, the ship managed to recover, got south of the equator, and at this time, Spain and Portugal were at war for the colonies in South America. So James's ship and the passengers were hauled into the port of Montevideo as prisoners of war, where he spent nearly a year. He was unable to land at Buenos Aires again. At that time, disease was rife when you were sailing the seven seas. The ship was quarantined, several people died, and James was assigned to the burial party, one of his fellow passengers, and he managed to slip the guards, escape the city, and make his way back to Buenos Aires, somehow crossing the Rio Plata, the River Plate. We really don't know how he managed to do it because it's many miles wide. But James could speak a bit of Spanish, so he was able to locate where the Spanish armies were in South America. You would have thought that after a voyage like that, you would never want to set foot aboard a ship again, but James had unfinished business back in Fredericksburg. He was a wealthy man, so he set aboard a ship and went back to Pennsylvania, loaded with many thousands of dollars at the age of 36. And this was reputedly, he was carrying $40,000 strapped in money belts about his person to build a mill to impress his sweetheart's father. When he arrived in Pennsylvania, he arrived to the news that his father had passed away the year before, so it was a bitter arrival. And these reports said he carried $40,000 of valuable South American skins and hides as well, because he was trading in animal skins. He arrived and found the grave of his father, and he also found that Barbara had since married the local constable, a guy called John Desch. So James didn't stay very long in Pennsylvania. He kind of left brokenhearted, and he returned to South America with heavier pockets than when he arrived because he profited from selling all these animal hides. The political situation in South America was still a bit unstable, so he decided he was going to relocate his business making pianos from Buenos Aires round to Valparaiso or Santiago, current-day Chile. He had sailed a lot by this time, so he was a very good, astute judge of a captain. And quite predictably, he embarked on the toughest ocean-going voyage in the world, which was to sail around the Horn. Quite predictably, the ship got trapped in a storm in the southern seas, so much so that at 2 o'clock in the morning, the tips of the sailing masts of the ship touched the water. The only thing that rescued the ship was James Lick's luggage, if you will, which was, prior to departing Buenos Aires, he had bought, still obsessed with building a mill, 2 millstones, each 17 tons each, that were in the hold of the ship, and these acted as ballast and helped right the ship as it came out of the storm. And the ship limped into port in Valparaiso, which is the access port for Santiago de Chile, and he immediately sold those millstones for a tidy profit of $4,000. While he was in South America, he would have heard tell of one of the first astronomical events that was communicated around the world, the first global media event in astronomy. Fear-inspiring phenomena. Described, this is a local article from Fredericksburg, in fact. The spectacle in the heavens was sublime and awful. Millions of burning skyrockets with streams of rolling fire. And this was an Instagram post of the day in 1833. It's a woodcut. And it shows people panicking in the streets. They had prayer meetings. They thought the world was coming to an end. And in fact, this was the well-known by now Leonid meteor storm that happens every 33 years or thereabouts due to the parent comet Temple Tuttle. Well, James almost certainly didn't see that, but it was one of the first astronomical events that he would have heard about. Meanwhile, he had decided to relocate his business from Valparaiso, current-day Chile, to Lima, Peru. and he settled into a pretty tight business community in Lima, and became friends with quite a few of his colleagues in downtown in the city there, one of which appears later in the story. His name was Domingo. But James was making piano cases in Lima, Peru for about 11 years. And while doing so, he was watching the political situation in the world and also the astronomical world, the scientific world. One of those events that he heard tell about, but almost certainly did not witness, was the Great Comet, another thing communicated around the world in the media of 1843. Meanwhile, the United States is at war with Mexico, and the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo is on the horizon. And James remarked that in any war, the United States had never been known to cede territory to a foreign government. It had always maintained its own borders or acquired territory, and he could foresee the cessation of New Mexico, California, etc., to the United States in the conclusion of the Mexican-American War. So he decided to liquidate his business and took a gamble, basically, on sailing into a small port town on the coast of California, which at the time of his departure from Lima was Mexican territory. That small town was called Yerba Buena, and he boarded a brig called the Lady Adams. And over the latter part of 1847 into the early weeks of 1848, he sailed on this ship in through the Golden Gate there, and landed at Yerba Buena. At the customs house, he declared three things in his luggage. One was a workbench and tools to make the pianos, which still exists today. The other was the liquidated value of his business, which is actually half the true value of his business because he was in a rush to leave Lima. So that was $30,000 of Peruvian gold doubloons. And finally, 600 pounds of chocolate from Guatemala that he had acquired from his friend Domingo. Then he went into this tiny town, which had a population of about 800 people. James is age 51. He buys the only solid built structure in the town, which was an adobe house, because most of these properties were basically sheds and tents otherwise. And he took the treasure into the floor, covered it over, put his workbench and tools over the top, and that could have been the end of the story. But something happened within 2 weeks of James Lick's arrival at Yerba Buena, which was later renamed San Francisco, to change California, the United States, and astronomical history forever. And that was that gold was discovered at Sutter's Mill in the hills, in the Sierra foothills, a town called Coloma. This caused the California gold rush, and suddenly Yerba Buena or San Francisco became the access port for everybody wanting to go prospecting for gold in the hills. Now, there are various stories that James tried or didn't to go prospecting himself, but what he did do was mine the miners. As people were coming and trading their properties in San Francisco, the only man with any ready cash to trade those properties in and around the area was James Lick with his $30,000 of gold. So in the space of about 18 months, as the population of San Francisco exploded to over 20,000 people, James Lick was, becoming a property magnate, became the richest man in California. So this is how San Francisco started to look in the 1850s, a few years after James Lick's arrival, completely different. They even started doing landfill, starting to fill the bay, making flat areas to build property that James Lick owned. James Lick wrote to his friend Domingo back in Peru and said, "Why don't you come to San Francisco? The 600 pounds of chocolate sold so well. I'll even give you the land to relocate your business and start your chocolate factory on." And that's how Ghirardelli chocolate arrived in the United States, at the invitation and recommendation and financing of James Lick. Well, here's our hero. Very austere personality. The beard was out of fashion even then. Also very eccentric. This is the richest man in California, the equivalent of Elon Musk or Steve Jobs. And what do you do when you're the richest man? Well, the first thing he did with his skills in woodcraft was he built a 24-room mansion in not far from San Jose Airport. Still stands today. But he never lived in it. All of these rooms were vacant except for one, which had a simple table and chair in it. Didn't even have a bed. Most of these rooms were filled with newspapers on the floor, lined with drying fruit and exotic fruits that he'd imported with his interest in horticulture. he had various orchards, vineyards, lands, and estates. Before it was called Silicon Valley, the Santa Clara Valley was known as the Valley of the Heart's Delight, because it was said that you could farm almost any exotic crop. And James Lick was an importer of exotic species and hybrid species. And he helped, in addition to astronomy, lay down California's agricultural industry. He also wrote to his illegitimate son, John Henry, who was given birth to 1 year after he left Barbara and Barbara's father to go and seek his fortune back in Stumpstown, Pennsylvania. This is the first time he laid eyes on his son, John Henry, and John Henry was probably in his 30s or 40s. The idea was that John Henry would eventually become the heir apparent to James Lick's businesses. But very quickly, James realized that John Henry did not have the same work acumen, did not have the same work ethic, and the two did not get on. And John Henry abandoned some of James Lick's pets as well. So eventually, James sent John Henry back to Pennsylvania and tried to disinherit John Henry from the will. James himself didn't sleep in that building, as I said. He preferred to sleep in a shed on the corner of the property, and he didn't even sleep in a bed. He slept on a door suspended between two barrels of nails for his packing crates for his pianos, or in fact, he slept sometimes on one of his pianos himself. Having completed the mansion, he then started to build a mill that would make Barbara's father's look like a pigsty, and that's the building in this picture on the left-hand side. And this $200,000 mill was called Lick's Folly because people couldn't understand why the multimillionaire had all of a sudden gone into the business of grinding flour. But we know why, because he had a promise to keep to Barbara's father. In this mill, there were crystal chandeliers hanging from the ceiling. The walls were lined with mahogany, and some of the machinery was made of brass and gold. It was the finest, factory mill this side of the Mississippi. And James had these photographs taken and dispatched to Pennsylvania so that Barbara would see that he'd, done good. He also designed the rat-proof grain store on the right-hand side here, part of which still stands, and you can visit it in San Jose today. At the time you and I would be contemplating retirement, James Lick walks into a bank and borrows $400,000 to build the largest hotel this side of the Mississippi and the finest hotel this side of the Mississippi. And within 4 years, he paid all the money back. So this was called the Lick House Hotel, and it occupied a whole city block in downtown San Francisco. It only survived to the 1906 earthquake when it was replaced by another hotel called the Palace Hotel. But the Lick House Hotel predates the Palace Hotel. And this was the place for the rich and wealthy and the San Francisco elites to come and dine. And when they were laying the floor of the dining room and making the picture frames, the old man was down on his hands and knees, supervising and participating with the workmen to make a dining hall that rivaled the Palace of Versailles that he visited years before. And this is the kind of event that the Lick House Hotel hosted in those early days. Unfortunately, as I said, it was lost to an earthquake and fire. James was now a very prominent member of the San Francisco business community, and he was moving in various circles. He was a Freemason, so free, gratis, and for nothing, he gave them his Masonic temple a building in downtown San Francisco. And just to put it in some context, the largest scientific or technical project the country had ever seen at this time was the connection of the construction of the Transcontinental Railroad, which was joined. The two sides were joined in Utah territory at Promontory Point. So this is an example of kind of the projects that were going on in the country. So while James is in San Francisco and moving around and attending talks like this evening, he stumbled across or heard a talk from an itinerant traveling astronomer by the name of George Madeira. And George Madeira had a small portable telescope, and he would go around gold country with his telescope, giving talks and showing people, a chance to view through the telescope. And it's because of George Madeira that California's first astronomical observatory was actually founded. And that was in a town called Volcano in gold country. It's not there now. There's just a marker plaque. But this is a measure of how influential George Madeira was. James Lick was captivated by George Madeira's, what he was talking about with the astronomy and so on. and he invited George back to his homestead. And at some point in the interview, Madeira said to James, if I had your wealth, I would build a telescope on top of a mountain. Because Madeira was aware that observations conducted at altitude or elevation and deliberately away from polluting effects, light pollution and smogs of cities were far superior to anything conducted in those locations. Up until this time, most astronomical observatories were on university campuses at the center of cities or in harbors, particularly because the ships in the harbor were setting their spring chronometers to keep the latitude, and astronomers were dropping time balls and firing cannons from the observatory so the ships could keep the time and set the clocks. The most important instrument at any observatory is a clock. It's not the telescope. Well, while James was spiraling in the orbit of George Madeira, the two of them observed repetitions of those events he'd heard about during his South American years. One was a great comet of 1861, and the other was a return of the Leonids meteor storm in 1866. And the records state that James and George were actually in James's homestead in the South San Francisco Bay. And they were trying to observe with George's portable telescope, but they gave up because the meteors were distracting them too much. So they kind of abandoned using the telescope and just sat on a wall watching the meteor storm. Well, James was becoming more and more interested in science, so he donates the first headquarters building to an institution called the California Academy of Sciences. The president at that time was also an astronomer come marine surveyor by the name of George Davidson, who became influential in James's thinking. And there's also in California a society called the Society of California Pioneers. And in order to qualify, your ancestor must have arrived in California before the end of February 1848. So James was a member of this society. It still exists today. But he gave them their first headquarters building in downtown San Francisco and also their second one, just for good measure. And he was actually the life president, but he offloaded the duties to a close friend. Well, I told you that James was kind of a bit of an eccentric character at some level. I've told you about his sleeping arrangements. People could not understand why he went into the business of flower making, and they called his mill Lick's Folly. He could be seen around the streets of San Francisco and the San Francisco Peninsula driving a wagon, and he had a very disheveled appearance. People mistook him for a tramp. And he could be seen collecting what we would consider roadkill or offal today, putting them on the wagon and then taking them back to the mill and grinding the carcasses between lots of grain. Now, I don't know what the reports of his bread was like, but his orchards, vineyards, lands and estates were the finest in California because of his interest in horticulture. He knew the value of bone meal as a fertilizer. There's even a story about a lady taking pity on James Lick from his appearance and making the husband give James Lick his top hat to tidy up James's appearance. And the lady never knew that she had just donated her husband's hat to the richest man in California. But James's quirky habits started to create some negative press in the local papers and so on, one of which was the San Jose Mercury News, which the proprietor of which was a guy called James Owen. And James Lick had originally, prior to these negative press articles, decided he was going to donate a structure to the people of San Jose, redolent of the palm house at Royal Kew Gardens that he'd visited years before. But in spite of because of the negative articles, he allowed the project to be abandoned. The structure arrived and was delivered, and it was left to rot on a quayside by James in San Francisco because he decided he wasn't going to donate to the people of San Jose. And it was only after James's death that a consortium of businessmen in San Francisco acquired the structure that had been prefabricated and erected it in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. And it's now a very popular tourist landmark called the Conservatory of Flowers, and you can visit it today. James was a very quirky character, but by the times that he lived in, there were very many other quirky characters around. I can't go through all of these in detail, but hopefully some of you heard of the Emperor of the United States and Lord Protector of Mexico, Joshua Norton. There was the second richest man in San Francisco who was renowned for his sharp business practices. His name was Sam Brannan. Passing through at that time was a guy called Samuel Clemens, better known as Mark Twain, a robber baron, the founder of Stanford University, one of the California people who built the railroads. And because he was being paid by the government, he deliberately built the railroad curved because he was being paid by the mile. So he got more money that way. That's Leland Stanford. And then there's the original sugar daddy, a guy called Bernard Spreckles, or Adolph Bernard Spreckles, and also purportedly a murderer. And my favorite, a serial liar, courtesan, multiple mistress, exotic dancer, and someone who almost bankrupted the state of Bavaria in Germany. Her stage name was called Lola Montez, and she died in California as well, but originally from Ireland. James had all these properties and so on that he needed a compliant workforce to maintain. So he had very well-known and famous, infamous interview tactics. He would ask you to plant a row of trees in his orchard if you were applying for a job there with him. And he would ask you to put the leaves in the ground and the roots in the air. And if you questioned this, you just did not get the job. You had to be absolutely compliant and have a good work ethic. One man who did get the job eventually was a Nova Scotian by the name of Thomas E. Fraser. And he's the guy who I gave you the original opening quote about, about all these crazy astronomers. Thomas Fraser actually became James Lick's confidential man of business and the foreman of the works constructing Lick Observatory. And he was almost an adoptive son to James. And it was Fraser that found James at his homestead on the floor of the kitchen after the old man suffered a stroke about the age 77 and got him to medical attention. And the two were basically inseparable after that point. But James was now considering disposal of his wealth. He was infirm, he'd suffered a stroke. So what was he going to do? And he teamed up with this guy, a bon vivant and raconteur who'd married into wealth. His name was Captain Richard Floyd, and he was a Georgian originally. And during the Civil War, he was the captain of a Confederate raider and had to leave the United States for a while at the end of the Civil War. James was actually a supporter of the United States government in the Civil War. So it's amazing that these two actually met and got on and became fast friends. Floyd eventually became the president of James's board of trustees. So James had to consider his wealth, and the first thing he decided to do was to set aside $1 million to build 3 statues at the entrance to the Golden Gate, one of his mother, one of his father, and one of himself. And these were going to be 50 feet high, looking out to sea. And it was a combination of Fraser, Floyd, Madeira, and George Davidson who said, bad idea. If there's ever a naval war, the first things to be used for range finding will be these heads on the statues at the Golden Gate. Don't do it. So the plan was abandoned. So then James decided he was going to build a pyramid in downtown San Francisco, larger than any Sudanese, Egyptian, or Mexican pyramid, the biggest one in the world. And he was going to put it on the corner of 4th and Market Street in downtown San Francisco. Now, this often provokes laughter from an audience when I say this, but James Lick owned San Francisco. He was the richest man in California. He could have done anything he wanted. He had designated $1 million of 1870s money to do this. It was perfectly feasible. However, the plan was abandoned. His consortium of advisors said, well, pyramids have been done before, think of something different. So then, still fixated on the site in downtown San Francisco, James settled on building a giant telescope or observatory. He wanted it to be in San Francisco where people would walk by, see his name above the door, and be remembered for it and contribute to science. And it would have been no different. As I said, most observatories at that time were in these kind of locations. But then that seed that had been planted by Madeira, the house guest, a few years before, came to the fore, and it was decided to build the telescope at elevation. But Lick demanded that it must be on a site familiar to him. So let's consider James's land holdings and properties. Well, I've already told you he owned San Francisco. He also owned large swathes of Santa Clara County, Mendocino County, and Sonoma and Napa County. So if conditions had been different and I was with you, I'd be probably trying to serve you the house red right now. But he also owned Catalina Island, which is a playground of the rich and famous today. He owned the largest lot in Los Angeles County. It was called the Los Feliz Ranch. Today we know it as Griffith Park, Beverly Hills, and Hollywood. And he also owned half the territory around Lake Tahoe, which is another winter playground. he did not own Mount Hamilton, southeast of San Jose, which is where I'm speaking to you from today. So how did we arrive and how did he settle on the construction on this mountain? Well, the first place they went to visit that was above the elevation threshold was Lake Tahoe, where James Lick owned property. And you can see in this map, just above the center line in the middle, it says site of James Lick's observatory. This is a map from 1874, but very quickly they realized that half the year that area is inaccessible due to snow, so the site was abandoned. Then they went to another pimple in the landscape that is on the boundary between Napa County and Sonoma County, right in the heart of California wine country. And James Lick, the man who had suffered a stroke, was dragged up there on a mattress that was on a wagon as part of the site surveying to canvass the site. The story goes that at some point the wagon he was riding in hit a rut in the road, and perhaps maybe a wheel did or did not fall off. But in any case, the old man was ejected into the roadway before they got to the summit of Mount St. Helena. At that point, he stopped the survey team, said, "Take me home. No piece of land that I own is going to do this to me." So when he got back to San Francisco, he sold the land immediately. The site was abandoned. But it was probably Thomas Fraser, we think, who said to James Lick, "Why don't you put it on Mount Hamilton? You can see it from your homestead. So although you've not visited the mountain, it is familiar to you." And eventually Mount Hamilton was transferred to the Board of Lick's Trustees by an act of Congress for the purpose of astronomical observations. A famous Chicago court reporter and amateur astronomer came and spent a summer living in a tent with a small telescope on Mount Hamilton to do a site survey. There was no road to the mountain at that time. He discovered 42 double stars, which were the astronomical vogue at the time, as testament to the quality of the site. Well, James Lick was a very wealthy man, and it wasn't just astronomy that he was disposing his money to. He identified various projects in and around the San Francisco area to leave money to, and all the ones that are encoded in red here are still going strong in some form or fashion. And if I look down here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, I think it's the 9th one. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, the 8th one. That is the original name of the home. It was called the Lick Old Ladies Home. Unfortunately, that's been changed now. It's called something else, but it's still a home for retired ladies in San Francisco. But you can see here the largest slice of the pot was $700,000 assigned to become the Lick Astronomical Department of the University of California. James Lick also left statues and monuments to various people, or funded them. As I said, he met and crossed paths with Francis Scott Key. So in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, there's a statue that's set up for Francis Scott Key, funded by James. Here's the Lick Old Ladies Home, which is now a retirement home in San Francisco. He funded sanitation projects and free baths and so on, lost to an earthquake in 1906, but still exists on 10th Street in San Francisco and still bears James Lick's name. It's the headquarters of an architectural business now. And he also funded $35,000 to statues and monuments for his family back in Pennsylvania, most notably of which was his grandfather, I believe, who was also an immigrant and spent the winter at Valley Forge with George Washington's army. So the young James used to sit on his grandfather's knee and hear firsthand stories. And to put it in some kind of context, when you look back through these Victorian era, or this Victorian era of observatory building in the United States, there were lots of industrialists and rich people that donated money. Very few of the observatories were named after astronomers. They're largely named after the well-to-do. But James's donation, when you calculate it, well, the last time it was done, calculate it forward to $2008, became the largest single private donation to an astronomical project in history, just over 1.2 billion with a B dollars. James stipulated a powerful telescope superior to any telescope yet made. Note that it does not say the biggest in the world, it just says more powerful than. Also, observatory be built around the telescope. It's not to be just an outpost of a university somewhere, but it must be a staffed observatory. That became very important in the story. And that this shall be made useful in promoting science. That's the reason I'm speaking to you tonight. James Lick wanted me to promote his observatory. This is the document that James Lick signed in 1876 in his shaky hand. He didn't write the text, he just signed it. His lawyer drafted the text, but this is assigning Mount Hamilton to be the location of his future observatory. And just before James Lick passed away, to give you some context of the times, there was a little upset at the Little Bighorn in Montana Territory. A guy was shot in the back of the head holding an 8 2/8 in Deadwood, South Dakota. And then James Lick passed away in October of the same year in his hotel. But in and around this time, it's fascinating to read about. And there was a great exhibition in Philadelphia in 1876 as well. And this is a British engineer writing back home about the changes that are happening in the United States. The United States is starting to pivot into the lead in science, engineering, and technology. At the Great Exposition in Philadelphia, you saw Graham Bell's telephone released to the world. Thomas Edison was wandering around. Ketchup was first demonstrated, as was popcorn. But the British were saying, if we are to be judged by comparison with the Americans in 1876, it would be to confirm that we are losing our former leadership and it is passing to the Americans. It's a very noticeable change. James also stipulated that a road be built, first class in every particular, to the summit of Mount Hamilton to facilitate the construction of the observatory. And this is how it was done. And most of these workers, brute force and ignorance and a little bit of dynamite, but these were Chinese laborers that were surplus from the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. And the road has its own character. There's various names. There's a turn for every gap, or every day of the year, and those who traverse the road all refer to these turns and so on. And in all California, there is no more delightful mountain road. Well, that was written by the first director in 1895, but the road has its own history. The first archetypal Mad Axe murderer was last seen on the road. This guy wiped out a family of 6 with an axe in San Jose in 1896 or something. And if you ever see him around on the road, let us know, because he's still never been apprehended yet. And there were hold-ups, and Black Bart was at large, and the ladies could be relieved of their jewelry while they were riding in the stages. The road presented a problem in the sense that just before he passed away, the trustees had said, well, you want the observatory to be your mausoleum. To aid the logistics, would you consider being cremated? And this was James's very forthright response. He said, no, I shall rot like a gentleman. And he died and was buried in the Masonic Cemetery in San Francisco in 1876. And thereupon, the trust project got working, right? And while James's trust was underway, other things were happening in the United States and around the world. For example, the USS Jeannette set sail from San Francisco in July of 1879 to explore the open polar sea, purportedly. It's a fascinating story. Several of the people aboard this ship passed away and were stranded in the coldest regions of the Arctic. Meanwhile, the finest scientific project the world had ever seen. Remember, before this, the most complex project that had been engaged in was the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The trust of James Lick's Board of Trustees contracted with a telescope maker by the name of Alvan Clark & Sons, or a lens maker by the name of Alvan Clark & Sons. And you may know Clark has a big history of ancient telescopes in America, for sure. And also in around the same period, while they're building the observatory, another ship was sent off into the Arctic region. One of the objectives was to look for the lost USS Jeannette, but this was the steam whaler Proteus, which is part of the US Army's exploration of Lady Franklin Bay. It was better known as the Greeley expedition. And it was the Wild West. So Billy the Kid had a bit of an altercation with Pat Garrett in July of 1881. Meanwhile, $1.2 billion is being disposed of on top of a mountain in the coastal ranges or in the Diablo Range in the South San Francisco Bay Area. This is the first structure that was built in around about 1880. It formed the north end of what is now the main building of the observatory. Into this enclosure, they installed a 12-inch Alvan Clark refractor that was bought secondhand, and it was bought by or from the estate sale of Henry Draper. You may know Henry Draper. His widow financed the Harvard College Glass Universe project. And again, in 1881, while all this is ongoing, there's the gunfight at the OK Corral. In 1882, Lick Observatory releases its first scientific publication, which is the first photographic record of a transit of Venus. So this is just one of those photographs. This was how scales and distances were determined in the solar system and by extrapolation across the universe in those times. And obviously, some of you may have seen a transit of Venus more recently, and if you missed it, don't hold your breath. There won't be another one for over 100 years, probably. Meanwhile, the observatory construction is continuing apace, and standing on the giant barrel in the foreground of this image is Fraser, James Lick's basically adoptive son, and he became the superintendent of the works constructing the observatory. We can see the dome now that we saw earlier. That's at the north end of the building in the background, and they're constructing this building forward towards the enclosure that would house the superior telescope, a telescope more powerful than any yet made. But they got to that doorway that's partially 3/4 constructed, and then they had to stop because they did not know how big the enclosure needed to be to accommodate the telescope. The lenses hadn't arrived, they hadn't determined the focal length, so they didn't know how long the telescope tube needed to be, and without that knowledge, they didn't know the radius of the enclosure for that to accommodate that telescope. But eventually in 1886, the lenses arrived. This was in December, and this is Fraser and Floyd welcoming the lenses. Floyd then had the focal length measured so that they could determine the focal length of the telescope or the length of the tube. And these were, at the time, the most expensive pieces of glass ever made. Originally started life in France, then went to Cleveland, Ohio, and then through Massachusetts, and eventually came on the railroad to San Jose, and were put in a giant safe that we still have on the mountain, while they then proceeded to build the enclosure and construct the telescope to hold the lenses. There was a formality. I told you James Lick was buried in San Francisco in 1876, and there he lay for upwards of 10 years, almost 11 years, until they were ready to exhume his casket and install it at the observatory, after a procession up the mountain road with his casket draped in the stars and stripes, accompanied by 200 of the great and good from San Jose and San Francisco, including the local town mayors. And apparently there was a formality at the time that if you exhumed a body, you had to open the casket and verify that the casket was still occupied by the person who was originally laid to rest. And the gentleman of the press, here we have Fraser, again, looking directly at the camera with Captain Floyd. The gentleman of the press asked Fraser and Floyd, when you opened the casket, what did you see? And the story goes that they told the press that James Lick had yet kept another promise. Yes, he had rotted like a gentleman. And then they installed the casket into the base of the telescope that was to bear his name and be the centerpiece of the original observatory, which was the Great Lick Refractor. And in that final winter, they put 99 tons of ironwork and steel on top of the building there. And this is what Paris looked like in just a few weeks before the observatory was opened. So this is December 1887. First light for the refractor telescope was the 3rd of January, 1888. And that was around the time when Jack the Ripper was stalking the streets of Whitechapel in London, and the finest scientific instrument the world had ever seen was ready for deployment on Mount Hamilton in California. That night, it was very, very cold. The dome was actually frozen in position. They couldn't rotate the dome, and they had to wait for Aldebaran or the Earth to rotate under the stars, open the shutter and allow Aldebaran to be visible through the frozen slit of the observatory. And they had a view with that fine telescope that was absolutely terrible. So there was a gentleman there that night who was one of the contractors who had built the support structure for the telescope. His name was Ambrose Swayze of Warner and Swayze, another very famous name in American telescopes. And he sent that evening to the observatory workshop for a hacksaw, and to $1.2 billion of scientific equipment, he cut 6 inches off the end of the telescope that night. And a storm came in, a winter storm came through, and they had to wait for 3 nights before they could attempt to re-observe after Swayze had made his modification. And they pointed the telescope to Saturn. And because Swayze had realized they had overestimated the focal length of the telescope, so by cutting 6 inches off the end of it, he brought the eyepiece of the telescope closer to the focal length. So 3 nights later, they had a view that was beyond doubt the greatest telescopic spectacle ever beheld by man. A view of Saturn, and that was written by one of the observatory staff astronomers at the time, who later became a director, James Keeler. And this is Keeler's drawing. He was also an artist as well as a very well-trained astrophysicist. And that night, on the 7th of January, they discovered a new gap in the rings of Saturn. So basically the first light of the telescope. We all know the Cassini division. Well, Keeler discovered the very narrow, faint exterior line or division further out in the gaps of Saturn. And it's not called the Keeler division. Keeler revered and honored his forefathers and forebears in astronomy. It's actually, at his behest, called the NK division, after NK, the shortest period comet, is also named after that astronomer. So Keeler had his discovery named the NK division. And it was only after the Voyager spacecraft went by Saturn during the grand tour of the planets in like the late 80s and early 90s that the Voyager team eventually named a new gap in the rings of Saturn that they discovered, following Keeler's tradition, as the Keeler gap. And there's the Keeler gap, just beyond the Cassini gap. And right, so the observatory was kind of instituted and ready for operation in January of 1888. It was officially handed over full and complete and in working order at James Lick's wish to the University of California in June of 1888. And again, this is how Paris looked just before the handover occurred. And it's an absolutely amazing piece of equipment. It's almost like a cathedral to walk into the dome. It absolutely captivates anybody who uses it. And the telescope is still used at the present time several times a week in the summer, exactly as it was used that first night in 1888. And you can come to the observatory and view through a superior telescope. It's absolutely mesmerizing. And we also have an elevating floor, and you can see James Lick's tomb below, illuminated, and the telescope above. It's a great honor, and we never hear the sounds of spinning in the grave, so we're pretty sure that James was happy with how we spent his money. And we get these spectacular images. This is from last year sometime, of the facilities we have. Well, the observatory started contributing to science, even before it was completed, with the transit of Venus and then the discovery of the gaps in the rings of Saturn and so on. But this telescope probably made its greatest contribution when Edward Emerson Barnard of Barnard star fame discovered the 5th moon of Jupiter in 1892. And you all know that the first 4 were discovered by Galileo in about 1609, 1610. So it took over 250 years for us to develop the technology to be able to find the 5th moon of Jupiter. And this also notably was the final time in history that a new world was discovered by just using your eye at the eyepiece of a telescope. All new worlds since that time have been discovered by weird exotic techniques like photography or spectroscopy or transit radial velocity techniques. So Barnard still holds that record. And if you ever read about Barnard, you will find that he was a biological freak, because his visual acuity was immense. When you look at the Pleiades with your naked eye, I cannot see 7 of the 7 sisters. I can probably see 5. Barnard could see 13 with his naked eye. So he was an immense biological freak, as well as an astounding, rigorous observer, but also a bit neurotic. And this is the handwritten log we have of the discovery of the fifth moon of Jupiter in September of 1892. Lick Observatory was conducting observations for a long time, and one of the things that we were involved in was looking for observing Mars at repeated oppositions. They happen every 2 years or so, looking at features. This is an artistic drawing just to capture your imagination. This isn't very scientific, by an illustrator of the time, a French illustrator called Trouvelot. But it contributed to some debate. So Lick Observatory and other observatories around the world were making these observations. And people were seeing things on Mars. And what they were seeing were between oppositions and even sometimes between successive observations on a particular observation, different features being illuminated on Mars. And we think now that this was, illumination effects catching snow-capped peaks near the pole or mountaintops on the surface with these larger telescopes. And there was a lot of discussion in the scientific literature about this, some of them anonymously, and some anonymous author wrote in one of the journals of the time, one of the forefront journals actually, it was either Nature or Science, that these changes in illumination on the surface of Mars were probably distress signals from civilizations. So this is quite separate from Schiaparelli's canals on Mars debate. But this was around the same time and probably fueled some of that. Well, because the observatory had then been in operation for a few years and itself made several successive opposition observations, the then director of the observatory, a man who has some tenuous connection with Michigan actually, his name was Professor Edward Singleton Holden. He replied in the literature, and it's my favorite scientific phrase, said that it was simply preposterous that this was a civilization signaling us of their distress from Mars. And there was another person who was kind of an amateur astronomer in London who was following these discussions and reading these articles on a sequential basis. He was obviously a subscriber to this either Nature or Scientific American or Science. I forget which one of the articles it was, but his name was Herbert George Wells. And it was because of this debate that the War of the Worlds became written. And if you ever get a chance to read the original War of the Worlds, you'll see that Lick Observatory gets name-checked in the first 5 pages of the novel. Barnard went on to do other things while he was at Lick, and then he moved away to the new Yerkes Observatory and always regretted it a little bit because the telescope was at an inferior location. But taking this camera with him, so he deployed this particular instrument at Lick and then deployed it at Yerkes as well, a wide field camera that was taking photographs of the galactic plane. And by comparing plates taken both at Lick and Yerkes, he discovered the highest proper motion star, Barnard star. And this is an example of his work from 1889, a very early phase in astronomical photography. And again, 1913, this is Rho Fucae, a very popular target, and it's basically right on the plane of the Milky Way, a very significant coordinate if you're navigating around the night sky, and a more modern rendition that hopefully you're all familiar with. I told you about Burnham. He was the court reporter in Chicago who surveyed the site originally. He became an early staff astronomer, but left to go back to court reporting, stenography, because it paid more money eventually. But he also made contributions to various things, stellar nurseries particularly. We have Hines Nebula, or it was called Burnham's Nebula prior to that. And these are the kind of things that inspired a lot of astronomers in that early period, the early 1900s, and the theory of stellar nursery and studies of nucleosynthesis and how stars are born and so on. Procyon B was a white dwarf that was observed, a companion star to Procyon, by a guy called Shaberley in 1896. This is noteworthy because it's the second white dwarf that was ever discovered. And it so turns out that white dwarfs were predicted before they were discovered. So that's another noteworthy accomplishment with Lick Observatory, like tying theory and observation together. Another guy who did some interesting work, when I was growing up, in all the picture books, the classical photograph of the moon was one that was produced here at Lick Observatory by Joe Moore. And it's this photograph, which shows great detail and immense relief. And it's quite difficult to get a picture like this. And in fact, it turns out this is a cheat, because this is a composition, a dark room technique. It was the two photographs of the moon taken at first quarter and last quarter, and then combined in the dark room to get the relief on the image itself. But this was in all my picture books and astronomy texts when I was growing up as a kid. And I can't go through all of these contributions, but basically the observatory has addressed every astronomical topic you can think of since its inception. Not satisfied with having the 36-inch refractor, we then acquired a reflecting telescope of 36 inches that was originally deployed in London in 1879, formerly owned by a guy called Andrew Ainsley Common. And Andrew Common won the gold medal of the Royal Astronomical Society for taking a photograph of something in the sky fainter than the eye could see. And this telescope Common sold to an industrialist in England, in Yorkshire, called Crosley, who then had a religious Damascene experience that told him not to be interfering in matters of the heavens. And eventually, by a long serpentine circuitous route, the telescope arrived at Lick Observatory, and it was our staff that deployed reflecting telescopes in an observatory environment on a practical basis for the first time. And the dome was shipped from the UK, as well as the telescope itself. And over the various years, people like James Keeler have observed things with this. It's called the Crosley telescope. And it's been rejuvenated and improved and re-engineered over the years. But one thing that Keeler was doing was experimenting with photography again. This is a photograph of the Orion Nebula from probably late 1890s, early 1900s. And this is a more modern rendition, so it's very faithful. And you can see the kind of change that photography introduced. So here's the Whirlpool Galaxy prior to photography. This is probably one of the best best images we had using the Irish Leviathan telescope at Burcastle, Lord Ross's 6-foot speculum reflecting telescope. And here's one of Keeler's photographs from 1899. And a modern rendition. You can see kind of the evolution of the technology and how faithful and how promising photography was to astronomy. But Keeler was not only interested in the spiral nebulae face on, he was looking at photographs such as this, a modern rendition, but this is Keeler's example, again from 1899. What Keeler noticed was that when he looked at these photographs and he looked in the background and zoomed in, he would see more and more and more and more and more diffuse spiral nebulae in the background. And this was kind of a curiosity to most astronomers at the time, and before most astronomers were considering this. What Keeler was realizing is that these spiral structures were distributed in a special way on the sky. They were not coincident with the plane of the Milky Way. They were outside or avoiding the Milky Way galaxy. And Keeler was well on the way to realizing that these things had to be disassociated with the Milky Way. They were probably island universes beyond our own. Keeler is doing this in the late 1800s and very early 1900s. And by virtue of that, he's 20 or so years ahead of other astronomers like Shapley, Curtis, and Hubble in realizing that these are island universes or external galaxies. Unfortunately, Keeler died in his middle 40s in San Francisco, so he never got really the chance to conclude that work, but it was inherited and continued by a guy called Heber Curtis. The observatory went on to build another 36-inch telescope based in Santiago de Chile. It was the remote observing station. This telescope still exists. It's now property of the Catholic University of Santiago in Chile. But basically, this was the first Gemini telescope, north and south, northern and southern hemisphere survey telescopes of the same optical configuration and aperture and capability. And that ran for a long, long time. At this time, the astronomical vogue was radial velocity work of the stars to work out the dynamics of stars in the Milky Way. And here's that telescope in its enclosure. I mentioned Curtis succeeding Keeler and following up those spiral galaxy observations. But Curtis was important for a probably more important reason, and that was special relativity and general relativity. Curtis was a classicist. He could read Hebrew, Latin, Greek, and German in the original. And following the First World War, quite understandably, the German-speaking world was somewhat isolated and ostracized from the community. Curtis was able to read the German language contributions from a Swiss patent clerk in the original language. And he was the first person to translate Einstein's theories into the English-speaking language in the journals. And he brought this to the attention of the then director, William Wallace Campbell. And Campbell continued to fund solar eclipse expeditions around the world, feeding one of Einstein's proteges, Erwin Freundlich, the data. And when Eddington announced the confirmation of the prediction of Einstein's theory of relativity in London in 1919, the whole of the astronomical world waited with bated breath for confirmation from Lick Observatory, because Campbell and Curtis were considered among the authorities on the observational predictions of Einstein's relativity. And eventually, in 1923, Campbell confirmed the predictions were true. And this was a letter that Einstein wrote to us from that period. It actually says the secretary, but that is Einstein's signature, and we have this in our archives, basically saying thank you very much for proving relativity. And just to give you an indication of the power that the directorship of the Lick Observatory held at that time, we have a motley crew here of the usual suspects at a conference in 1931, and you can see Einstein there. To the right of Einstein as we look, that's William Wallace Campbell, the director of Lick Observatory. On the left, you've got Michelson of the Michelson-Morley experiment. He was one of the founders of Caltech. A bit to his left, or the two characters on the left are Edwin Hubble and Milton Humason. And the guy in the painting on the back wall is George Ellery Hale, who founded Mount Wilson and Mount Palomar observatories, and Yerkes, actually, but only after he'd visited Lick on honeymoon. Well, we move on through the years, and some of the other contributions Lick has made was the first detection of a quasar spectrum, or an AGN, active galactic nucleus, in 1908. We also have the first detection of interstellar chemistry, and particularly interstellar sodium, by Mary Lee Hager in 1919 as part of a PhD project, one of the early women graduates of UC, of the University of California in astronomy. And also she discovered something called diffuse interstellar bands, or DIBs, or DIBs, which are still a mysterious subject of investigation for modern astronomy today. We also have the first evidence of dark matter in galaxy scales. People will have you believe that it was Vera Rubin in the 70s that came to this, and certainly she progressed the field. But the first actual indication of a flattened galaxy rotation curve was taken by a guy called Horace Babcock in 1938. And this is the published and he remarked on it. He said this was a curious thing, but he didn't really go into much greater depth about it. But that's, 30, 40 years in advance of Rubin lighting up the field. We also served many other graduate students through the years, including people like Fred Whipple. And we've acquired various additional facilities through the years. For example, the double astrograph, the Carnegie double astrograph, which was a Northern Hemisphere sky survey telescope, which helped navigate Voyager on the Grand Tour, and also discovered for the first time the cosmic foam structure in 1947, the large-scale structure of the universe, which we now see rendered in modern computer cosmological simulations. That enclosure has recently been repurposed for another modern telescope called Panoseti, which I don't have time to go into, but it's a modern technology near-infrared pulsed laser detection system. Following, hopefully most of you have seen Oppenheimer, the movie. Well, one of the people that doesn't get any credit in that movie, unfortunately, is J. Robert Oppenheimer's head of staffing on the Manhattan Project, a guy called C. Donald Shane, or Charles Donald Shane, who was present at the test of the gadget at Trinity site in New Mexico and was the head of staffing on the Manhattan Project. At the conclusion of World War II, Donald Shane, being an astrophysicist, very familiar with thermonuclear reactions, became director of Lick Observatory, went down to Mount Palomar and picked up a giant disk of Pyrex, 120 inches across, and built the telescope that now bears his name here on Lick Observatory. And this was a revolution, and it first went into operation in late 1959. And in 1969, we were talking about the moon landings earlier on, Tranquility Base was lit up with a Shane telescope by firing a laser through the optics. You can see this is a photograph of Aldrin on the moon. Just behind his hand there is a detector, a reflecting array. Sorry, not a detector, a reflector. The lunar retroreflector. That was designed to reflect laser signals incident on it. Not to measure the distance of the moon, although that's one of the spin-off benefits. But in the 1960s, the idea of continental drift or plate tectonics was a very novel idea, unconfirmed. So the idea was, if continents are drifting around on Earth and the moon is cold and dead with no continental activity or plate tectonics, then we might be able to detect continental drift by firing a laser from the moving plates on Earth to the fixed point on the moon. And that's actually the heritage of this experiment. I think it was the second or third experiment deployed by Aldrin and Armstrong on the moon. And it's still the only Apollo-era experiments deployed on the moon that's in use today, with lasers still being fired at it from various observing sites around the world. Here's an example of our more modern laser that we use. Laser devices and laser adaptive optics were pioneered at Lick Observatory. It's one of our great claims to fame in the late 80s and early 90s. And, you know, if you don't believe that we were there, we can tell you that we were there because, okay, Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter has taken photographs of the landing sites with the astronauts' footprints, but we proved we were there within 2 weeks, shortly after they splashed down and were picked up by the USS Hornet. We had proven, because we got a reflection from that retro reflector. Also, while I'm here, another thing we did was, this is the Apollo 15 landing site that was discussed earlier in the meeting. And it talked about Hadley Rill, that maybe you can probably observe with some of your telescopes. The reason that Apollo 15 went to Hadley Rill was because of a single photograph taken at Lick Observatory in the 60s by a guy called George Herbig. Apollo 15 was originally planned to go to somewhere else, but this photograph by George Herbig completely caused the redirection and reassignment of the Apollo 15 landing site. Herbig, as I said, was involved in his main scientific thrust was stellar evolution. In the 70s, we deployed a new telescope with spare parts, basically a 1 meter telescope. That's still in operation almost every night. We have now robotic telescopes like the Automatic Imaging Telescope, looking at supernovae, detecting them very early, even pre-maximum. And then we're diagnosing the spectra of these things, deciding whether they're type 1 or type 2, diagnosing their environments. And that's helping us measure distances and velocities across the universe. And it was data from the Kate spectrograph, or the Kate telescope, that contributed to both of those papers in 1996 that told us that the expansion rate of the universe was accelerating, and that won the Nobel Prize. One of our former directors, Sandy Faber, has revolutionized astronomy at least 4 times by my count, for various reasons. But one of the great things she did from the 1970s onwards was define or derive or discover scaling relations in galaxies that allowed us to work out, well, you can work out the intrinsic brightness of a galaxy based on some other observable in the galaxy itself. And for that, she received the highest civilian award from President Obama in 2013. We're able to routinely measure the mass of black holes at the centers of other galaxies by a reverberation mapping technique. recently, or within the past few years, you saw the Event Horizon Telescope results on M87. The first indication that M87 was special was done by Curtis in 1918. He took a photograph and saw the jets protruding and made a comment about it in the paper there. But that made M87 an interesting target for the Event Horizon Telescope and the first direct image of the shadow of a black hole. Fraser in 1883, when he was laying the foundation stone of the observatory, speculated on exoplanets. And today we now know that basically they're ubiquitous. Kepler was road tested at Lick Observatory, or at least the technology was road tested. We have a very strong heritage in the discovery of exoplanets. We have a robotic automated spectrograph dedicated to the radial velocity technique. And we're discovering exoplanet systems on a routine basis. I was going to say every day. It's not quite every day, but certainly routinely. Lick Observatory discovered the first multiple planet solar system back in the 90s. And we continue apace with this discovery, with these modern technologies. Staying with modern technologies, we not only observe, but we do deploy these new technologies like the laser systems, the adaptive optic systems, and something that may actually wind up being the successor to CCDs. They're called MKIDs, or microwave kinetic induction detectors. They are zero read noise, zero read time, and you get the energy of the photon and the position of the photon simultaneously. The only disadvantage is that these have to be operated at 0.003 Kelvin. So when this detector arrives on the mountain, we had to kind of knock holes in the observatory wall to run the cooling lines to the truck outside to have it cool down for about 4 days before we could actually use the detector. But maybe in 15, 20 years, these will be the detectors in our cell phones. It's been retired now, but Lick contributed to FlightCam. It seemed like a good idea at the time to drill a hole in the side of a 747, but we had technology and expertise for infrared detectors at that time. This is the adaptive optic system, and only last night I was observing with that adaptive system. I finished work 6 o'clock this morning after partly observing Uranus and Neptune at the end of the night. We're monitoring the weather on planets, halfway and 3/4 of the way across the solar system. We're able to resolve these features. And the laser technology is very popular technology. It's now expected and deployed at every major current observatory and forthcoming observatory around the world. Not only isolated single lasers, but constellations of lasers are now the astronomical weapon of choice, if you want to call it that. And even at Lick, we in recent weeks have been deploying a very high technology new ultraviolet laser system, which is invisible basically, but we're just road testing that, and that's on our cards for the next few weeks and months to verify that that system works. Lick is a place of inspiration. I mentioned that George Ellery Hale came to the observatory with his wife Evelina on honeymoon in 1890, before he'd even built Yerkes, Mount Wilson, or Palomar. I used to be able to say at this point we didn't know what Evelina thought of it, but we do know what Evelina thought of it. She hated it, especially when George extended their stay for a further 2 weeks on the mountain. Hubble was a regular visitor to Mount Hamilton. The first time he came was after he was demobilized from World War II. He arrived in uniform. He wasn't very popular among his colleagues. Thereafter, he was always referred to as the Major rather than Dr. Hubble, but he ended up marrying the sister of one of the Lick resident support astronomers. So he was a regular visitor and collaborated and sometimes observed at Lick as well. Friend of the observatory was Thomas Edison. There was no electricity in 1888 when the observatory opened. Everything was driven by water power. So Edison came along and donated the first generator to the mountain somewhere in, about 25 years after we opened in 1910 to 1920, something like that. Former presidents have visited the observatory and observed with the telescopes, as have former prime ministers, including Winston Churchill, and princes, royalty, and so on. So this is just a reassurance that we don't let the riffraff in, and you're all very welcome to come and visit us to keep that regal company. And we have a very vigorous program of public education and outreach and events throughout the year. This is the Transit of Venus in 2012. We're producing maybe 45 scientific publications a year right now. We have over 35,000 visitors a year if COVID doesn't intervene. training something like 200 new astronomers every year. And it's a very big site. It's 3,600 acres, 59 buildings. And you can, we're within a straight line distance of about 13 miles of the 10th biggest city in San Jose in the country. And you can see us when you land at SFO, and you can see us from Yosemite as well. And we are very honored. We have an asteroid called Lick. We have asteroids called San Jose. And we were touring the moon earlier in the meeting. And some of those landing sites are very challenging. But luckily, Lick crater on the moon and Yerkes actually are very easy to find. But somebody was having a joke because they were both put in the Sea of Crises. And you can see that Lick is slightly smaller, but better resolved. And the Yerkes observatory, the Yerkes crater is slightly larger, but slightly less well resolved. And even in the early days, the observatory was revered by the local populace. And in the same breath, we get mentioned alongside the Insane Asylum, the Asylum for the Feeble-Minded, and Lick Observatory. So it looks like we're keeping good company. And this is from a publication in 1889. Well, for all that, the contribution to astronomy since those times of the late 1800s, a very important period in US history and astronomical history, we have one person to thank, and that person is not James Lick. It's Barbara's father, for making this young man so bitter and twisted with his condescension that James Lick left town to make a fortune and leave the lion's share of it to astronomy. The other people we need to thank are people like yourselves for taking an interest in astronomy and supporting astronomers. You're taxpayers in your state, so you don't directly contribute to the coffers of California or the University of California or anything like that, but some slice of it certainly goes to the scientific funding authorities like the National Science Foundation. And perhaps more than any financial support, we need advocacy. So we need scientifically literate communities to support the work we do, recognize that it's valuable, and spread the word to our colleagues in our communities. For example, when challenges face us, like light pollution, like satellite mega constellations that are coming down the pipe, things that concern us, so that we have a population that understand and value the work we do. Not everybody that comes through the observatory is going to wind up as a professional astronomer, but most of them hopefully will be scientifically literate and go into positions of power or decision making several decades hence. So when the axe starts to fall, maybe some of these observatories and the work we do will be given reprieves to continue the work we do. So I'm going to thank you for your support and thank you for the invitation.
So we just gave you a rousing round of applause. You didn't hear it because we just unmuted, but trust me, you got a wonderful round of applause for that. An excellent presentation.
Are there any questions from the audience here?
Asking when the earliest of the large reflectors came in, as reference to when they built the refractor at the observatory.
There's a question of when the earliest large reflector was built relative to the first large refractor at Lick.
So the large refractor was constructed, like I say, in that period from 1876 to 1888 and deployed in 1888. The trustees actually, Floyd, if you read what he did, he went all around the world on his own dime to consult with the major observatories of the world. So the US Naval Observatory, the Greenwich Observatory, the Paris Observatory, even observatories out in Asia. And in the end, while they had the chance to equip the observatory originally with a reflecting telescope, they didn't want to take the risk. So they went with the established proven technology in the refracting telescope. However, they kind of looked out because Andrew Common, the amateur in London, had built something in 1796. His 1 meter reflecting telescope. That was as far as we know, that was the first large-scale glass substrate reflecting telescope, and that was silvered at the time. That was a silver surface. There were reflecting telescopes obviously prior to that, but they were all speculant. In France, in Nice, I think Leon Foucault was experimenting with reflecting glass on a very, very small scale. But although the Andrew Ainsley Common reflector predates Lick, Lick acquired it in 1895. So Lick started in 1888 and acquired the reflector in 1895. And from that point on, basically every telescope, once we'd road tested it and proven the technology, every subsequent research telescope was reflector after that point, unless it was a specialized case. There are some solar telescopes that use refractors still, but generally from that point on, having the experience of Lick informed every succeeding observatory to go for reflector telescopes.
Thank you. Any other question? Does anyone online want to ask a question? If so, unmute and ask it verbally.
Yeah, I have a question. I read that
Louder, please.
when the lunar reflector was first used with the Lick Observatory, it was determined that the Lick Observatory was misplaced on the Earth by 82 feet. Was it ever determined how that error was made? Was it surveying error or what was the deal?
Yeah, luckily, some of the people that were there that night are still around, and they dine out on their story.
Could you repeat the question?
Oh, so the question is this non-apocryphal anecdote that when they fired the laser at Tranquility Base, the result was that Lick Observatory was misplaced by some, I forget, it's several hundred feet, not 82 feet, when they did the calculation backwards. And it's not apocryphal, it's a true story. And luckily we know this because some of the people that were still there that night on July the 20th, 1969, tell it firsthand and dine out on the story. So the coordinate that was used was the triangulation point at Lick Observatory's main building, the original site of the original observatory. But the Shane telescope is about 1/3 of a mile to the east of that site. So they were firing the laser, and there was this offsetting coordinate. They were firing the laser from a position that was about 1/3 of a mile from the coordinated position at Tranquility Base. So there was this kind of panic for a while until they realized what was going on. So the other side of that is I mentioned that the inception of that project was investigation of plate tectonics. The determination of the distance of the moon very accurately was a side hustle, if you want to call it that. The other, or the second corollary, is that it was the most accurate determination of the distance between the observatory main building and the Shane telescope that was ever made because of this coordinate offset.
Fascinating. Any other questions? Well, Dr. Lynam, this has been fascinating. Thank you, and very enriching, full of amazing historical detail. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for your interest in astronomy. Keep supporting us, and clear skies.
Okay. Good night.
All right, everyone. Our next meeting will be next week, Thursday, August 17th, in person at Macomb Community College, South Campus, room 208 in the E building. It's probably too late if you're going to go to Redcoat Tavern afterwards, but folks have been going to, I don't know, there is a Coney Island. So if folks at Cranbrook want to do some gastronomy afterwards and meet, you guys can arrange that yourself. I won't be joining you, sorry. And with that, we'll close the meeting down. Clear skies, everyone, and good night.
So Bob, how are you going to get down from low Earth orbit there?
Yeah, you like
you
that?
look like you're you look like you're floating at a Lagrange point. So are you sure you're gonna be down to earth by the time the
Hope,
Macomb